out myself, so I've got the names of the people that are here. And
They do get certificates.
they get something. We haven't figured out what.
Chocolate would be nice if you don't get
Chris and I
vacation.
will be visiting about that one of these days soon, right, Chris?
Yes.
In our spare time. But it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. He is Herb Thompson, Professor of Education and the Education Division Chair at Emory and Henry College in Emory, Virginia. Herb is on his second visit to us as a CWAS Fellow, and he's from the previous cycle of fellows, so he's sort of finishing up that cycle for us. He's a writer, he's a poet, essayist, and literary critic with an interest in the American West, among other things. So we're very pleased to have him explain to us how the McCracken collections sort of fit into his project on a literature of hope, which is kind of the spin that he puts on Western literature for us. So that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm not going to use the microphone unless you really think I need to, but can you hear me okay? Yeah. I've been interested in the West ever since I was this tall. And the Saturday morning westerns, going to the movie, it just seemed like something exciting to me. We're all in the West right now, and we know it has a pull on us and that it has a special significance. But what are the factors that make the West so unique? I'm also involved in Appalachian studies in terms of regional work. And I find a difference in the literature between the two, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But there's differences in regions, and yet there's a lot of similarities. But the West is special. And trying to come to some understanding as to what pulls us all here is what's led me into the larger book project that I worked on during my sabbatical, and what led me here to the Cody Center. And I'll explain all that in about half an hour here. But let me start by reading just something to you. I'm sort of protected up here, so if we get attacked, I'm okay. I don't know about you all, but I hate to get behind all this, but I need to. Let me read you something from your collection. Faye Snyder was 9 years old in 1922 when she and her family first came to Cody. When asked why her family stayed, she said, well, my dad's sister was here and her husband, and they just thought it would be nice if we tried something new, I guess. And we loved it, so we stayed. Right, does that sum it up? For some people it does. They just come here, it's so pretty, don't have anything better to do, or whatever, they come and stay because of just the feel or whatever it is that they see in the place. For others, it may be a little more complex. There's a writer, Harry Crews, some of you may know who he is. If you're an MFA person, you would. He's an academic writer. He was at the University of Florida, Florida State, one of the two. Published many novels, and a former Marine, interesting sort of cutting-edge guy, but he made this statement. Not about the West per se, but I think it applies to the West, and Mary included it in the little announcement about this. Well, let me read it to you. So far as I can tell, nothing good in the world has ever been done by well-rounded people. The good work is done by people with jagged, broken edges, because edges cut things and leave an imprint, a design. I think there's some truth to that. I think that's where we get texture. I think that's what makes us stand out or apart from other people. But I do think people in the West are on the edge for some reason. So why are we here? There are many questions and issues to be considered. Is it just a matter of the appearance of the place? Is it a matter of how we bump up against edges? Is it archetypal in a way? For example, now if you know, I'm going to show you a painting. If you know who the artist is, please don't tell anybody for just a second. I found it in the Goatsman book here, The West of the Imagination, and if you don't know this book, there's a copy here in the library. But it's a wonderful book on Western art. I do recommend it to you. But here's the painting. Who recognizes it? Good for you. Don't tell anybody who it's by. But when you look at that picture, it has sort of a Starry Night Van Gogh quality to me, because if you look, you see what looks to be horses. You know, there's let me turn the lights down here a little bit. There's horses, there's like a 20-mule team tank behind it, there's a Conestoga wagon. If you look at the center, you see a facade of a building. I don't know what that thing to the right is, and then up there at the moon, if you look at it, doesn't that look almost like a face looking down on the earth? And I showed this to a colleague not long ago, and he said, you know, this looks like this is through a fisheye lens. Notice how the perspective is exaggerated, and accentuated, which gives us a very strange feel for what this might be about. Do you know who the artist is? Do you?
Yes,
Who's the artist?
Jackson Pollock.
Does that look like a Jackson Pollock you know? Doesn't, does it? Let me ask you another question, and to see if you know this answer. Where was Jackson Pollock born? Cody, Wyoming. His father worked as a part-time dishwasher at the Irma Hotel. He was born in Cody, and although most people think of him as somebody that was in the East with the drip paintings, that's where he came to prominence, he spent the first 30 years of his life as ranches in California, Nevada, Arizona. He and his father and brother worked in a geologic study in the Grand Canyon. So it was the West that formed a lot of his initial visions of the world. Well, that may be good, but now here's some more contemporary paintings by Sandoval, and here's another one by Jennifer Cavan, more contemporary in Taos, New Mexico. But if you look at those paintings, there's some similarity to this in terms of the angle, the extension, the color, the exaggeration of space. And I think a part of that has something to do with what makes the West special and unique. But again, is it just a matter of appearance? Is it a matter of archetypes? Is it just the concept of the land that Faye Sanders had when she was a 9-year-old girl? I don't know. Or is perhaps your vision of the West something like this? Jousting today.
Where is the girl, Ned? She was in the one glance when last I saw her. I can't answer for her now.
You'll answer for her now. Where is she?
Rooster! Make a run for it! I got Daddy! Teddy, too! Well, Rooster, will you give us the road? I have business elsewhere.
Earl, you and your brother stand clear. I got no interest in you today. Stand clear and you won't get hurt.
What's your intention? Do you think law enforcement a dog fall?
I need to kill you in 1 minute, Ned, or see you hanged in Fort Smith at Chet Parker's convenience. Which would be?
I call it bold talk for a one-eyed fat man.
Fill your hand, you son of a bitch!
Shoot them! They're too far and moving too fast.
No good. Mr. Conrad, not much.
That's probably enough of that. The bottom line here, you know, to some people the West is what it was for Faye Snyder, a rather innocent, beautiful place. What Harry Crews said surely describes the people that you see portrayed here. They surely all have ragged edges. And that is a part of the concept that I think most of us have for this part of the country. But it's not just about that. It's also about freedom and privacy. And there's an upside and a downside to that. I think we're pulled into this area because we have a great sense of having some freedom, but if you read some of Annie Proulx's stories, some of that freedom's not always good. Somebody ought to be paying attention because there's some strange stuff happening. But be that as it may, that's also a part of the West. Is the West, where is the West exactly? A lot of times in history, Bob Morgan talks about this in his book, Boom, and it's been discussed many times, West is often East in terms of the concept of West. Where the adventure is, the frontier is east of where the actual line of immigration is, and that's long been established. So sometimes it's hard to figure out where the geography is. Is the West just about wide open spaces? I mean, we all know that the concept is that the lonely cowboy, I know it's sexist, but the lonely cowboy out on the plains or the desert by himself. But the fact is, it's always been true that the majority of people in the West live in towns and cities. And also, the conception is that there's perhaps, it's a little rougher in the West, which it is to some degree. But frankly, if you think something that's a little more contemporary, like a river runs through it, and think about that was the 20s or whatever. But if you think of how people dressed and what they did, the games they played, what they did on weekends, there's not much difference between that and what was happening in the eastern part of the United States where my family was from at that time. So there's a lot of misconception. There are wide open spaces, but there's also towns, so that's not what makes the difference. Is it about surprise? Surely that's a part of it. I know, for example, Diane, my wife's sitting back there, when we were coming from Hell's Canyon in Idaho. We were on our way to Sun Valley. We came into Regan's, Idaho at night, and of course out west are there street lights everywhere? No. It was dark, so we checked into this room, and we couldn't see anything of the town at all, and it was just a regular room, a nice room. And over here you'll see that there's sort of a door in the back, and I opened it, couldn't see anything, but I could hear water running. And I thought, well, that's just, a stream. So we went to bed, and I got up the next morning, and I opened that door again, and boom. That was not what I expected to see out that back door. I expected to see a little stream running down there as opposed to something that spectacular. And of course, I think that sometimes surprise is surely a part of it. What about myth? Buffalo Bill, as we all know, I don't know that lie is the correct word, perhaps, but he surely exaggerated parts of his past, not all. And he had a reason for doing that. Lawrence talks about that in his biography. That's a point of discussion to many people. But what's the truth? What's reality? What's myth? Is it always clear which is which? Here's something else for you to consider.
Too much. Besides, you didn't kill Liberty Valance. What? Think back, Pilgrim. Valance came out of the saloon. You were walking toward him when he fired his first shot. Remember? Bumpy. I do. This time, right between you. President of the United States. You're not going to use the story, Mr. Scott? No, sir. This is the West End. When the legend becomes fact, and the legend.
And of course, here's me last year, downstairs in the Cracker Reading Room, and what do you see right up at the top? This is the West End, when the legend becomes fact, print the legend. Which brings me around to why I'm here. And what I hope you, what I've done during my time at the Cody Center. The book that I've worked, how the West won me, does take a look at the difference of why the literature of the region that I was born in, the Appalachian region, unfortunately, a lot of it ends up being the literature of depression. But for very complex reasons, when I read the literature of the West, even something like even Blood Meridian or any book by Cormac McCarthy, when I'm done with the book, even though I know that evil walks on this earth after reading McCarthy, there's always a sense that somehow we can get on top of this and move beyond it. And I find that in almost every book that's set in the West, and that's what's intrigued me. And I explore that in terms of professional writers. But a part of the project that I wanted to do was take a look at the common person, somebody who wasn't a professional writer, who came West and found something there that they wanted to, when they wrote back home and talked about it, they shared, that excited the imagination of the people back in the East. And Buffalo Bill in his program, you know, and almost every one of them said the denizens of the East love what's happening in the West, and that's true. Well, what was it that they pointed to? So that's what brought me to the Cody Center, and I plan to look at several different collections. And I ended up focusing on the Charles Rapp collection, and the Victor Arnold collection, and the Frank Tenney Johnson collection. And I'll tell you what I found as a result of that. These are collections that are around here, but now in Charles Rapp's case, he came west from New York let me check the date here because I don't want to get that wrong. He came west in 1875, 1874, searching for gold, and was a reasonably educated person, but he wrote back home, and his writing was not particularly well done, and you'll see mistakes there, they're his, and there may be one or two of mine, but they're primarily his. But what he wrote back were sort of fundamental things, but they were important in terms of what was happening in his life and what he shared with people back home. So I wouldn't call this great art, but it's not the specific representations itself, but the overall cohesive effect when compared with other writers that makes a difference. He says here, reminders to like to friend even, you will excuse me, I know, for not writing sooner, when you hear how I went flying down a mining shaft. I'm sorry to hear that the young ladies and gentlemen of Columbia can't get joined with the holy bond of padlock, excuse me, I meant wedlock, without running away, talking about some principles, getting married or eloping. But then they are happy, I suppose. Kind friend, I wish I was there to accept your kind offer, for I have been very homesick since I got hurt and have to stay in the house all the time. Now, you would say that a young man like me ought to never get homesick, but I have found the old saying is true, that there's no place like home. And then another statement says, I'm sorry the bottle of specimens did not reach you, for I would like to have seen gold in the way that nature formed it, so I will send some more and see if the U.S. mail robber will make them. Mail is very unsafe in this frontier country. It is snowing here as fast as it can fall, great flakes as large as some of them snowballs we used to make at school. I take some of that back, but not much. I'm in hopes that this snow will go off again, as I want to go to the Black Hills this winter sometime and hunt for new diggings. These are about played out. Now, pretty routine in terms of the day-to-day living, but think about it. You're back east. You're living a traditional life, and you get this letter. What does it make you think of? It makes you wonder, gosh, what's going on? How is this not more exciting than the life that I'm living? And I think this is the impact that a lot of remembrances that people had. That's the kind of impact that it had on the readers of this writing as it was sent back home to the East. And of course, this collection, Carling did a wonderful article for New Magazine here 2 or 3 years ago about the Charles Rapp collection, and it's an interesting collection to take a look at. Now, let's see. Here's another one. We had a nice time last week. There were a lot of immigrants passed through here on their way to Utah. They camped here 2 days. And while here, we had a dance. It was our first chance since the camp was discovered to have a good time. There was a number of young ladies with the party, so we had a pleasant time. You may judge. The building we danced in it had no roof on it. The floor was not very smooth, I can assure you, but we did care just so that we had a nice time. Our music consisted of a mouth organ, a cracked fiddle, and bagpipes. That's interesting sounding. But you make do with what you have, you know. Now, don't you think we enjoyed ourselves? We danced until 12 o'clock and then stopped for our grand supper, which was cooked by a large campfire by some of the ladies. It would have been a grand sight to you to have seen us all seated on the ground with our tin cup and plate. Oh, it was jolly, and I tell you, and as soon as the supper was over, we went to dance again. It would have been dancing yet if our band had not got so sleepy and broken their instruments. Whether they literally did or not, it sounds to me they might have been drinking a little bit too, but we'll never know for sure. That's buried in history. But again, that's the kind of thing that Charles Webb was talking about. And see, that excites the imagination of the people that it was sent home to. Now, another person that I took a look at was Victor Arlen, who, along with John Corbett, in a couple of different locations, but one in Arlen, Wyoming here, created a business. Let me be general as I say it. It's a business that served the region in many ways. It was a store where you could buy things that you needed. It was also a bar, and there were other things that you could purchase, comradeship of various kinds. We'll just leave it at that. He used to even take that comradeship out around to the various ranches and wagons to sell, as the case may be. You can come up with your own mind on that. But at any rate, Charles Arlen was a very well-educated person, and came from France, came in through New Orleans, worked as a waiter for a while, eventually moved his way on up to St. Louis and then Kansas, and then he always had a way with business, and so it was his ability at business that got him on out to Wyoming and turned him into a very successful businessman. Now, we just went out Sunday and took some pictures. You've all seen this sign if you're from here, out towards Witteetse, and Arlen was located behind there somewhere. I'm sure there's somebody that knows exactly, but it was behind there somewhere, and here are the pictures that are up there. That's a picture back in the day. And this is a picture of a film, or a book, The Woman in Blue by L.D. Edgar, and of course that Arlen Saloon is a pretty close rendition of what the saloon looked like. But Arlen wrote to his friend Camille, I'm going to get the name wrong, but to Didot, Camille Didot. He wrote letters to this person all the time. They were written in French, and I believe it was probably wasn't the French teacher here in Cody that translated these. Someone
Former librarian.
The former librarian.
Francis Clymer.
Yeah, they translated these, but they were originally written in French. But they're very interesting in what they say. You'll easily understand that it is not through indifference that I was so long in giving you news of me, but indeed because of the life that leads in the country where I am, certainly everything isn't rosy in the life of adventure. Always on alert, traveling from one place to another without a fixed abode, one must live like solicitude and hunting in order to be able to endure life in the desert. Sometimes living in abundance, sometimes in privation, without counting the inclemency of the West here. But that isn't important. One makes the best of one's bad luck. When he's happy and gay, I enjoy everything. But I tell you that I'm beginning to get tired of this sort of life. Civilization is more agreeable than all the liberties that one enjoys in the solitary spaces of the far West. I have to return home next spring. Very articulately written. I don't know how much the translator cleaned things up, but I think it was probably a pretty accurate translation. He was a pretty articulate person and reasonably well educated for his time. Here's another one. As he talks about his explanation of his disposition, he was known to not be an easy character to get along with. And here's some of the reason why. Here again is a letter to Don. The cattle live in almost a wild state. The only care that is taken of them is to brand the calves each season with a red-hot iron. For this purpose, the cattle raiser employ cowboys who consist of gathering together the cattle in certain places, then lassoing the calves and branding them with the owner's brand. The cowboys are singular characters, for a violent and without their equals in their spirit of independence, but they know how to appreciate a man of courage and energy. In the towns of the far west, they are getting a most deplorable reputation through their audacity and lack of restraint. But in our place, I can assure you they behave very well, which astonishes very much those who don't know cowboys thoroughly. In the early days, when I first kept the saloon, they thought I would permit them all liberty of our place, but after having thrown into the river several of these desperate characters, they showed lots of respect for us in our place. Consequently, my presence, when there are a great number of these men in our house, is indispensable, for they know that I do not permit whoever it may be to quarrel in our place. They show me much respect and friendship. I've come to a point of having great authority over them, which is astonishing for a foreigner. If, however, you wish to get informed on the life of the far west, the best book is Camps in the Rockies by Bailey Grossman. This is the most realistic book on life in the region where I am. So I would advise you to get this book, which would interest you very much. So that gives you a sense of his perception. He was eventually killed at Red Lodge, and after that, Arlen pretty much disappeared off the face of the earth, pretty much literally gone by 1897, I think it was, and the TC had since been founded and so forth. Most of you know that history. But there's an interesting little point here. Mary told me the other day that, or Carly did, whoever did, I think Mary did, that camps in the Rockies, that there's a copy here in the library, and I got in and looked at it. And the thing that struck me, not only, by the way, I would recommend the book, Arlen is right, it's a pretty accurate description of how somebody moved through this country at that time in history. The thing that struck me, however, look at the date of this letter, December 5th, 1884. The publication date on that book is Scribner's 1884. Now, how the devil did he get that book, or was he aware of it, that close to its publication out in Arlen, Wyoming? That tells you something about his connections to commerce and to trade and to his ability to read and the kinds of conversations. I don't know. It makes me curious. But the fact that he knew this book, months after it was published, is interesting to me. Again, an articulate version and a colorful person to the history of this area, but when you look at what he wrote and you put it together with Charles Rapp, you begin to put together pieces of a puzzle. I'm going to move on to Frank Tenney Johnson. Frank Tenney Johnson is, of course, is a major artist, and the people in this room would know who he is, but let me just read just 2 paragraphs here. An important part of how the East was introduced to the West and a source of Easterners' imaginings about the West was greeted by many artists and illustrators. One of these was Frank Tenney Johnson. He was born in Iowa, studied in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where he also worked for a newspaper and then studied in New York at the Art Students League. He eventually moved to the West to paint, setting up a studio in Alhambra. Many of his Western paintings were inspired by many trips he took to the Rimrock Ranch near Cody, Wyoming. Although not as well known as Western artists like Frederick Remington and Charles Barry Russell, he is the only one of these 3 prominent Western artists who received the National Academy of Design's highest distinction, being designated a National Academician. So of those 3, from his fellow artists, he was the most highly regarded. I think that's an interesting thing because he's not the person that gets the most attention. Now, these are not very good resolutions because they were taken off the internet, but it gives you some idea of the kind of thing that Frank Tenney Johnson did. He was known particularly, and Harold McCracken talked about his skill here with nocturnals. This is not very good, but if you see the original, underneath that hat, you can get a sense of the outline of the face and can actually see features on that face. From a painter's perspective, I'm a painter, I'm telling you, that's darn difficult to do, and I do watercolors, but even with oil, that's a tough thing to do. But he was very good at it. And this particular painting here, the drawings that led up to this painting are down in the collection. And so you can go see what he was doing as he was planning to put this one together. Plus just some wonderful pictures. He knew everybody. Leo Carrillo, who was Pancho in the Cisco series years later, all kinds of actors at that time in Hollywood. Well, here's what is unique for me, and from a literary perspective, very unusual. Folks, 2-dimensional artists, 3-dimensional artists don't describe their work in writing. It just doesn't happen. It's very, very rare. Frank Tenney Johnson wrote a written description of the kind you're seeing right here for almost every painting that he did, at least the ones he was trying to sell. And you've got copies of all of that in your collection. Well, I could read this to you, but here's the unique thing about this collection. When you take what he has here and don't change the order, but just separate it out in the way that a poet would do, I also am a poet. If you write this, just separate it out a little bit. Look at what happens to the images here. A rider of the range. The deep snows of a severe winter on the uplands of the northern cattle range have melted and gone down the canyons in a roaring flood. The warm suns of June have brought forth a fine growth of grass and foliage, and over the hills and above and below the rim rock of the canyons, the odor of pungent shades is wafted to the nostrils of this lone rider as he searches for the spring calves which must be rained. Now, folks, that has a poetic quality. I'm not going to say it's the greatest poetry that's ever been written, but it has a poetic quality in its distinctness and the imagery that it tries to create with words. And the fact this is written by a painter is unusual. There's another example here, Arizona Twilight. In the velvet mist of the Arizona twilight, the silver crescent of the moon gleams soft, and ghostly above, the rocky trail is a stretch of sandy desert. The outline of the giant cactus softens in the opalescent veil of dusk. The voice of the night comes faintly on the breeze, and the silent Navajo horseman gazes into the mystery of the evening clouds, his heart inscrutable to the light band. Folks, when you put all 3 of these together with a couple of other people that I looked at, what you walk away with is the kind of thing that many years ago I was in a presentation on the documentary film as Art and all. I'll tell you that story. But one of the things that came out of that presentation was that even a scientist waxes poetic upon occasion. You know how it is. Most of us may not be artists on a day-to-day basis, but if something really moves us every once in a while, we can write something that goes beyond the literal fact and goes to a more artistic statement about what's happening in life. And when you look at all of these people put together, you begin to get a more vivid picture of what was important to the West to them, which I think gives us a sense of at least a portion of the answer, not a clear one, but a portion of the answer to some of the questions that I was raising at the beginning of this. Now that's what I worked on last summer. I'll look at the time real quick. I'm just going to pass this out. We don't have much time left here before I will at least give you a chance to maybe ask one question or so. Get your hand out. Just pass it down. Did you not get one?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you very much. Everybody have one? Now, folks, what I focused on this year, and I'll not spend a lot of time on this, is the work of Ron Bishop. He was a screenwriter from 1959. For about 20 years was his period of time. He wrote for almost every major television series and won a lot of awards, and he was considered by many of the producers of the day to be one of the best screenwriters that was writing during the time. And in your collection, there are 18 scripts, I believe. Did I count that right? 18, I think?
I'm not sure.
No, there's 16. There's like 18 folders, 20 folders and 16 scripts. Anyhow, the scripts downstairs or down the hall from Maverick, Gunsmoke. There's full-length film scripts or whatever. What makes them unusual is, take a look at the one I've just given you. If you read this, he has incredible detail. I believe that if you took this and took away all the stage direction, it reads almost like a short story. Like he rides along on Ruth, Warsack looks like a laundry bag hanging down either side of the saddle front. He stops in reaction to offstage. As he walks toward us down a hill, we can barely hear Mannon's distant rendition, and Mannon, the central character, comes into the scene and he's singing these songs. Then on a fateful Sunday morning, and so forth. Angle on Mannon from Festus. Festus turns Ruth toward Mannon and spurs off. Angle from Mannon. As Festus draws up, Mannon has stopped the singing, watches flat and cold note, both hands along the horn saddle and so forth. If you look through this, there's an extreme amount of detail, and I think if you look at this compared to most scripts that you would have for plays and even other movie and television scripts, there's more detail in this script than you would normally find. Well, what happens when you take this and you see what happens in the production? Well, I've got the judge just a minute, we'll please look at the product here.
Horse took lane, did he?
I'd shoot him a while back.
Let's talk right about it.
Horse took lane, did he?
I'd shoot him a while back.
Well, I'd sure give you a ride in Dodge if you're mine to. Old Ruth here, he's stout enough to tow both of us, I reckon.
Riding devil not too comfortable.
Oh, Phil, it's been my pleasure.
Not mine. Step down.
What?
I said step down.
Mister, I don't especially like your tone. Nor your words neither.
Down.
But it takes all kinds to...
study that entire script, you'll be amazed at the depth that he goes into and the detail that he uses. And this plays itself out in a very interesting way in the latter part of this particular selection. This was got a tremendous reviews in Los Angeles Times it was done, because one of the things that Bishop did was that he dealt with contemporary issues of the day that had nothing to do with the time in which this was happening, but he dealt with those contemporary issues in this Western setting. What comes up, we don't have time to watch it, but what comes up, for example, I'll just play just a moment. Back it up.
Look what I brought you. I made up my mind. Good. That'll make it easier. You staying at all? You're staying all right. Because it's here you're dying. Oh. That's right. How'd you come by that? I know men. I know how they think. And I know how they act around their own kind. Aside from the way they act around women. Well, what's that got to do? Matt Dillon's a man. But he's dead. No. You are. You really believe that? You'll believe it too, when you see him. Woman, you are a wonder. As sure as there's a sun and a moon. He's gonna kill you. Red, it's been lots of years, and I've never lost. You did with me.
Ooh. Getting fast right there. But, folks, think about the time, that this first aired in 1968. I mean, that's when the women's movement was really kicking into high gear. Women weren't portrayed that way on television, so to have a person like Miss Kitty that was revered by generations of people, to take on this guy directly and put him in his place. I mean, she was clearly abused. It doesn't get into detail, but she was clearly abused by this guy. And so that's an interesting part of what I'm looking at is some of the issues that Bishop gets into as he does some of these period pieces. Folks, I had a little more fancier conclusion, but we're essentially out of time, and I wanted to at least give you a minute or two to ask a question if anybody had one. Does anybody have a question? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.